What's good? What's good? We back with part two, chapter 4, Cannon Creek, 1985. Body opens her door to a man dressed to his nines. She was used to seeing the gentleman looking so good and smelling so sweet on an early Friday evening or any evening. Body had a little twice as gray suit and gold striped tie, shiny black shoes that surely pinched his toes, and cuffed pants that sat a bit too high above his ankles. In the absence of his mail sack, the only thing that looked familiar about Tally Beneford was a beer belly protruding way beyond his swart leather belt. My, Bonnie said. Tally looked bashful at his own feet. You ain't had his dress up for mint jelly. Tally Beneford, she teased. All right now, he mumbled. She grinned. You look as good as a $5 piece. Coming from Friday service. No, ma'am, he replied and quickly added. Not that there's anything wrong with the church. I mean the late service and all. Bonnie had never seen Tally this ill at ease. He glanced over her shoulder. Throw her in, he asked. Tally looked even more uncomfortable when a Tally smile swept across Bonnie's face. I come to see if maybe I can sit with her this evening. So you finally got the nerve. He shrugged. Figure I ain't getting no younger, he said. Then he whispered, and neither is Dora. You were surely right about that, Bonnie whispered back. But I'm afraid she ain't here. She went to town to see a movie. I knew she ain't seen that film. Teddy slid his hand in his pockets. Didn't know Thor was keeping company. She ain't, Bonnie assured him. Threw us in the cinema house all by herself. Teddy looked relieved. Why don't she come on in, Bonnie said. She'll be back soon enough. He wiped her shoes on a welcome mat. Teddy had been in his house practically every morning for the past 5 years. But it seemed that his former clothes and the reason for his visit gave him manners that Bonnie had never seen before. She'd been gone all afternoon, Bonnie said as she led him into the living room, where he took a seat on the sofa. He looked like a stranger without his postal uniform. Can I get you some sweet tea? That'll be fine. Thank you, ma'am. Bonnie was about to walk into the kitchen when she noticed the Tally had rested his hat on the couch beside him. You know better than that, Tally Benford, she scolded. Excuse me, he said, snatching up his hat. My house is po enough, she said, taking it from him and placing it on the coat stand. Bonnie then went into the kitchen. She suddenly wondered how Thora would react to Tally Benford coming to calling. Probably not well at all, but Bonnie had to admire the man for even trying. What's she go see? Tally called out. The new show started today, she hollered from the kitchen. That there movie where all them old folks is turning young again. Cocoon? That the one. Ice clinked as Bonnie filled 2 glasses to the rim. Sometimes I go alone, she said, returning to the living room. But today, I wasn't in the mood. I know how that be. He took a swig of tea, but enough for a cork coaster from the stack on then reached for a cork coaster from the stack on Bonnie's coffee table. The gal ever call you? He said. You know, the one from the Christmas letter. Not so far. Letter come, 3 weeks ago? He said. Sounded like she was chomping at the bit. Just as well. Ain't got much to tell the woman. Bonnie hoped that Thora would return soon. If she didn't, Bonnie wanted to Tally plan on waiting the whole time. Good manners prevented her from inquiring. I mean it to ask you, Tally said. Thora started. Why she? Direct, Bonnie cut in. Thora Dean always been that way. Tell you about yourself in no uncertain terms. Tell you about your mama too if you push her, Bonnie chuckled. I've known her since we were girls, and I've always appreciated her ways. I guess her manner got even more salty after she lost her husband. I sang that song myself. Horse Dean died from a stroke about 15 years ago, Bonnie went on. That man treated Thora like a queen, and if he didn't, she'd be the first to go upside his head. I know that right, Tally laughed. Kind of like my wife, Grace. She paused. She passed before I even moved to the 3 sisters. Had that cancer, you know. Cancer in the woman parts. And I declare she's just as obstinate as Thora. And I mean she was that way before the cancer even come along. But Lord, she was a fascinating woman. He shook his head proudly. Had that same fire as a Thora. You call it fire? You call it fire, Bonnie said. That's what it is. And I asked to find someone that make you feel alive? Well, for the first time since he walked through the door, Bonnie took his visit seriously. Thor was her oldest and dearest friend, and Bonnie had assumed that she was the only person who could see the warmth in that person. Clearly, she had been wrong. Tally Benford wasn't the best-looking man, and he didn't have much. But he had driven his old heap of Bonneville all the way from Moonstone to visit a woman who would sooner spit on him than receive him with kindness. He was here to visit with Thora because he likes her heart. The phone rang, punctuating this brief moment of intimacy. When Bonnie answered, she could hardly make out Thora's panicking words. "Thora," Bonnie said in the receiver. "Wait, just calm down, honey." Bonnie faced Tally as she spoke. "Say the tire blew?" Tally stood right up. He took on that look of purpose that Bonnie saw every morning. "Tally is here," Bonnie said. "I'll explain it to you later," she said. "But I'll tell him to come and carry you home." No, just sat right there in the diner and he'd be alone." Bonnie hung up the phone. She a little nervous, you know. "I understand." Tally started out the door. She was about to follow him to the porch when the phone rang again. "Throw yes, darling. I know it's getting dark, but just stay put. Girl, set him down and help yourself a slice of that apple pie." Bonnie waved Tally out the door. "He on his way." "Okay, yes, honey. Okay. Honey, bye-bye." Bonnie hung up the receiver. She stepped outside just as Tally pulled out of the yard. She watched until his car had disappeared. Bonnie heard the phone ring again. As strong as Thora seemed, it was strange how a small chick in her chain could completely throw the woman off. "Thora, honey, he's on his way." "Is this Bonnie Wilder?" a young woman's voice said. Bonnie paused. "Miss Wilder?" Though Bonnie instinctively knew the answer, she steeled herself to ask, "To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Augustine Randall," the woman said. "I wrote you a letter a few weeks ago, but you might not have gotten it because I didn't have your full address." "I did get your letter, honey," Bonnie said. The girl sighed happily. "I'm so glad." Bonnie could hear the relief in August Randall's tiny voice. "Sorry I took so long to call, but I wanted to give my letter some time to find you." "I understand," Bonnie told her. "It's wonderful to actually talk to you," Augustine said. "How have you been getting along, Miss Wilder?" "I'm in good health. Thank you for asking." "That's a blessing." Indeed, Bonnie knew that this woman wanted to get right to the point, but she could tell that Augustine had been raised to be polite. Bonnie could feel the woman's breathing, her respect for condition and formality. "So you're a school teacher?" Bonnie said. "Yes, ma'am. I teach math to third graders." "Math?" Bonnie gasped. Never was good at numbers and figuring. "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "And your husband? He a teacher too?" "Joe's a professor at Rutgers University," Augustine answered. "Two such smart people," Bonnie said. "He teaches social science to incoming freshmen and also a course in pre-law." Bonnie listened for any sign of loose ends in the girl's voice. And what would it sound like? Would her words sound loose and uncaring? Her voice sensual and hard-biting? Bonnie suddenly hated herself for trying to find Lucille in that girl. Of all people, Bonnie knew that those rough traits didn't come through blood. "Can you help me, Miss Wilder?" Augustine said. "I would love to one day give my own son or daughter a sense of where they come from, who their people were. It wouldn't serve nobody to know their mama was someone like Lucinda. And right now, hearing this woman's voice, so excited, so hopeful, Bonnie was convinced of that fact more than ever. She held the receiver with two hands. "I'm afraid I can't help you, sugar." "Surely you could tell me something." Bonnie had always admired people who clung to their convictions, and she could tell that this young woman wouldn't easily give up. Perhaps she was as stubborn as Lucinda once was. Bonnie closed her eyes and offered up a slight apology. She was doing it again. She was assuming traits in this young woman that surely had nothing to do with Lucinda. Then too, stubbornness was a quality that lived in a lot of people, including Bonnie herself. And stubbornness in a woman could often be a strength. "Is there anything you can remember?" the girl pressed. "You said that your adopted mama was named Evelyn Porter?" "Yes, ma'am," Augustine replied. "Small, brown-skinned girl. And your daddy, Dorsey? He was high-toned, good-looking man." "Yes, ma'am," Augustine said. My daddy died about 15 years ago. Nice folks, Bonnie said. They want a child so bad, and I was happy when I finally able to get them a little girl. And that child was me? Augustine's voice brimmed with anticipation. Yes, dear, that was you. It took a while to recall, but Bonnie vaguely remembered. She recalled that Evelyn, petite and soft-spoken, seemed so nervous. When she took Bonnie's hand, her palm was cool and moist. I do remember Evelyn, Bonnie said. She seemed like a lovely lady. Yes, ma'am, Augustina paused. But can you remember anything about my biological mother? Bonnie sat down in the chair beside the phone. You say Evelyn was a good mama? I love her dearly. How about your daddy? Bonnie asked. They were both wonderful parents. Bonnie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Then maybe you should just let things be, she said. For a moment, all she could hear from the long distance static over the phone line. Let things be? You having a baby, Bonnie said. That's such a blessing. And you'll let her say that you need to take it easy. I know many women in my day that had beautiful, healthy babies after months of bed rest. Ain't no need in getting yourself in a state about the past. But isn't it that for me to decide? Augustine almost sounded desperate. Isn't that my call? She took a deep breath. Mrs. Wilder, she said, is it that you can't help me? Or is it that you won't? Oh, girl, Bonnie said wearily. We didn't see most of the women that dropped these children. They arrived in the night with so many secrets. Most in a lot of pain. Your mama could have come from a whole nother country. A whole nother state even. I guess she won't help me then. Bonnie could hear the disappointment and silence that followed. Well, thank you, ma'am, Augustine said. Sound like you got a good life, Bonnie ventured. A good husband. And you're having a baby. Right there are three blessings that many women will never have. I won't take up any more of your time. Just give thanks, girl, Bonnie said. Relax yourself and don't be worrying about this old nonsense. Good night, ma'am. Bonnie wasn't quite sure how long she sat in the dark room. It wasn't until she heard the instant drone from the phone that she realized she hadn't even hung up. Damn. Why you just to tell her what you know? What's going on? Man. I gotta tell y'all, it seems like a chick be booming now. Phone be blowing up. I'm trying to make a video. Phone be blowing up. I'm trying to make a video. Doorbell ringing like crazy. Trying to make a video. Neighbors calling me downstairs. Trying to make a video. All these distractions when I was sitting at the crib and I wasn't making videos like this. My days was empty. Days empty and boring. Just, looking for something to do. Now I'm like, all right, I'm going to be a YouTuber. I'm going to be motherfucking YouTuber. Everybody, the phone want to work. The doorbell want to work. The light want to work. The sun want to work. It all want to work. But none of that will stop us from hitting our goal. I am going to have to leave. So I am only going to be able to put out 2 videos today. I got plans now. So now it's like I can't boom shock y'all. Can't break the system because I'm too busy trying to live life. I'm sorry, y'all. Chapter 2 of The Little Lame Prince. Everyone's very kind to the poor little prince. I think people generally are kind to motherless children, whether princes or peasants. He had a magnificent nursery and a regular suite of attendants, who was treated with the greatest respect and state. Nobody was allowed to talk to him in silly baby language, or dangle him, or above all to kiss him. Though perhaps some people did it for he was such a sweet baby that it was difficult to help it. It could not be said that the prince missed his mother. Children of his age cannot do that. But somehow after she died, everything seemed to go wrong with him. From a beautiful baby, he became sickly and pale, seeming to have almost ceased growing, especially in his legs, which had been so fat and strong. But after the day of his christening, they were withered and shrank. He no longer kicked them out in either passion or play. And when as he be nearly a year old, his nurse tried to make him stand up on him, he only tumbled down. This happened so many times that at last people began to talk about it. A prince and not able to stand on his own legs? What a dreadful thing. What a misfortune for the country. Rather misfortunate to him also, poor little boy. But no one seemed to think of that. And when, after a while, his health revived and the old bright look came back to his sweet little face, and his body grew larger and stronger, though still his legs remained the same, People continued to speak of him in whispers and with grave shapes of the head. Everyone knew, though no one said it, that something, it was impossible to guess what, was not quite right with the poor little prince. Of course, no one hinted this to the king, his father. It does not do to tell great people anything unpleasant. And besides, his majesty took very little notice of his son, or of his other affairs, beyond the necessary duties of his kingdom. People had said he would not miss the queen at all, she having been so long an invalid, but he did. Also, her death, he never was quite the same. He established himself in her empty rooms, the only rooms in the palace where once could see the beautiful mountains, and often observed looking at them as if he thought she had flown away thither, and his longing could bring her back again. And by a curious coincidence, which no one dared inquire into, he desired that the prince might be called, not by any of the 24 grand names given him by his godfathers and godmothers, but an identical name mentioned by the little old woman in gray, Dorla, after his mother, Dolores. As once a week, according to established state custom, the prince, dressed in his very best, was brought to the king his father for half an hour, but his majesty was generally too ill and too melancholy to pay such heed to the child. Only once, when he and the crown prince were ecstatically attentive to his royal brother, were sitting together, with Prince Dorla playing in a corner of the room, dragging himself about with his arms rather than his legs, and sometimes trying feebly to crawl from one chair to another, it seemed to strike the father that all was not right with his son. "How old is his royal highness?" said he suddenly to the nurse. 2 years, 3 months, and 5 days, please your majesty." "It does not please me," said the king, with a sigh. "He ought to be far more forward than he is now. Ought he not, brother? You who have so many children must know. Is there not something wrong about him?" "Oh no," said the crown prince, exchanging mean looks with the nurse, who did not understand at all, but stood frightened and trembling with tears in her eyes. Okay, we got this, y'all. "Nothing to make your majesty at all uneasy. No doubt his royal highness will outgrow it in time." "Outgrow? What?" "A slight delicacy in the spine, something inherited, perhaps from his dear mother." "Oh, she was always delicate, but she was the sweetest woman that ever lived. Come here, my little son." And as the prince turned around upon his father, a small, sweet, grave face, so like his mother's, his majesty the king smiled and held out his arms. But when the boy came to him, not running like a boy, but wiggling awkwardly along the floor, the royal conscience clouded over. After having been told of this, "It is terrible, terrible, and for a prince too. Send for all the doctors in my kingdom immediately." They came, and each gave a different opinion and ordered a different mode of treatment. The only thing they agreed in was what had pretty well known before, that the prince must have been hurt when he was an infant, let fall perhaps, so to acquire his spine and lower limbs. Did nobody remember? No, no one. Indignantly, all the nurses denied that any such accident had happened, was possible to have happened, until the faithful country nurse recollected that it really had happened on the day of the christening, for which unluckily good memory all the others scolded her so severely that she had no peace of her life. And soon after, by the influence of the young lady nurse, who had carried the baby that fatal day, and who was the sort of connection of the crown prince, being his wife's second cousin once removed, the poor woman was pensioned off and sent to the beautiful mountain from which she came, with orders to remain there for the rest of her days. But of all this the king knew nothing, for indeed, after the first shock of finding out that his son could not walk, and seemed never likely to walk, he interfered very little concerning him. The whole thing was too painful, and his majesty never liked painful things. Sometimes he inquired after Prince Dorla, and they told him his royal highness was going on as well as could be expected, which really was the case. For after worrying the poor child and perplexing themselves with one remedy after another, the crown prince, not wishing to offend any of the differing doctors, had proposed leaving him to nature. And nature, the safest doctor of all, had come to his help and done her best. He could not walk, it is true. His limbs were mere useless apprehensions to his body, but the body itself was strong and sound, and his face was the same as ever, just his mother's face, one of the sweetest in the world. Even the king, indifferent as he was, sometimes looked at the little fellow with sad tenderness, noticing how cleverly he learned to crawl, and swung himself about by his arms, so that in his own awkward way he was as active in motion as most children his age. Poor little man, he does his best, and he is not unhappy, so unhappy as I, brother, addressing Crown Prince, who more constant than ever in his attendance upon the sick monarch. If anything should happen to befall me, I have appointed you regret. In case of my death, you would take care of my poor little boy. Certainly, certainly, but do not let us imagine any such misfortune. I assure your majesty, everybody will assure you, that it is not in the least likely. He knew, however, and everyone knew, that it was likely, and soon after it actually did happen. The king died as suddenly and quietly as the queen had done, indeed in her very room and bed, and Prince Dolor was left without either father or mother, and as sad a thing as could happen, even to a prince. He was more than that now, though. He was a king. In no man's land, as any countries, the people were struck with grief one day, and revived the next. The king is dead. Long live the king, was the cry that rang through the nation. And almost before his late majesty had been laid beside the queen in the splendid mausoleum, crowds came thronging from all parts to the royal palace, eager to see the new monarch. They did see him. The prince took care they should, sitting on the floor of the council chamber, sucking his thumb. And when one of the gentlemen in waiting lifted him up, carried him fancy carrying a king to the chair of state, and put the crown on his head, he shook it off again. It was so heavy and uncomfortable. Sliding down to the foot of the throne, he began playing with the golden lions that supported it, stroking their paws and putting their tiny fingers into their eyes, and laughing as if he had last found something to amuse him. "That's a fine king for you," said the first lord in waiting, a friend of Prince Regrets, the crown prince that used to be, who in the deepest mourning stood silently beside the throne of his young nephew. He was a handsome man, very grand and clever looking. What a king, who could never stand to receive his subjects, never walk in progressions, who in the last day of his life will have to be carried out like a baby. Very unfortunate. Exceeding unfortunate, repeated the second lord. It is always bad for a nation when its king is a child, but such a child, a permanent cripple, if not worse. Let us hope not worse, said the first lord in a very hopeless tone, and looking towards the Regret, who stood erect and pretended to hear nothing. I have heard that these children have very large heads, and great broad foreheads, and staring eyes are well, let us hope for the best, and be prepared for the worst. In the meantime, I swear, said the crown prince, coming forward and kissing the hilt of his sword, I swear to perform my duties as Regret, to take care of all his royal highness, his majesty's, with a grand bow to the little child, who laughed innocently back again. And I will do my humble best to govern the country. Still, if the country has the slightest objection, but the crown prince, being journalism, having the whole army at his beck and call, so that he could have begun a civil war in no time. The country had, of course, not the slightest objection. So the king and queen slept in their tomb in peace, and the Prince Dorlo resigned over the land. That is, his uncle did, and everyone said what a fortunate thing it was for the poor little prince to have such a clever uncle to take care of him. All things went on as usual. Indeed, after Regret had brought his wife and her 7 sons and established them in the palace, they went on farther better than usual, for they gave such splendid entertainments and made the capital so lively that trade revived, and the country was said to be more flourishing than it had been in a century. Whenever Regret and his sons appeared, they were revived with shouts, "Long live the crown prince! Long live the royal family!" And in truth, they were very fine children, the whole 7 of them, and made a great show when they rode out together on 7 beautiful horses, one height above another, down to the youngest on his tiny black pony, no bigger than a large dog. As for the other child, his royal highness Prince Dora, For somehow people soon ceased to call him His Majesty, which seemed such a ridiculous title for a poor little fellow, a helpless cripple, with only head and trunk and no legs to speak of. He was seen very silent by anyone. Sometimes people dared enough to peer over the high wall of the palace garden, notice they're carried in the footman's arms, or drawn in a chair, or left to play on the grass, often with no one to mind him. A pretty little boy, with a bright, intelligent face and large, malicious eyes. No, not exactly maliciously, for they were his mother's, and she was by no means sad-minded, but thoughtful and dreamy. They rather perplexed people, those childish eyes. They were so exceedingly innocent and yet so protruding. If anyone did a wrong thing, tell a lie for instance, they would turn around with such grave, silent surprise. The child never talked much. That every nasty person in the palace was rather afraid of Prince Darling. He couldn't help it, and perhaps he didn't even know it, being no better a child than many other children. But there was something about him which made bad people sorry, and grumbling people ashamed of themselves, and ill-natured people gentle and kind. I suppose because they were touched to see a poor little fellow who did not in the least know what had befallen him, or what lay before him, living his baby life as happily as the day is long. Thus, whether or not he was good himself, the sight of him and his affliction made other people good, and above all, made everyone love him. So much so that his uncle, the regret, began to feel a little uncomfortable. Now, I have nothing to say against uncles in general. They are usually excellent people, and very convenient to little boys and girls. Even a cruel uncle of Babes in the Woods, I believe to be quite an expeditional character. And this cruel uncle of whom I am telling was, I hope, an expedition too. He did not mean to be cruel. If anyone had called him so, he would have resented it extremely. He would have said that was done entirely for the good of the country. But he was a man who always been accustomed to consider himself first and foremost, believing whatever he wanted was sure to be right, and therefore he ought to have it. So he tried to get it, and got it too, as people like him very often do. Whether they enjoy it when they have it is another question. Therefore he went one day to the council chamber, determined on making a speech, and informed the ministers in the country at large that the young king was in failing health, and that it would be advised to send him for a time to the beautiful mountains. Whether he really meant to do this, or whether it occurred to him afterward that there would be an easier way of attaining his greatest desire, the crown of Northland, is a point which I cannot decide. But soon after, when he obtained an order in council to send the king away, which was done in great state, with a guard of honor composed of 2 whole regrets of soldiers, the nation learned, without much surprise, that the poor little prince, no one ever called him king now, had gone on a much longer journey than to the beautiful mountains. He had fallen ill on the road and died within a few hours. At least so declared the physician in attendance and the nurse who had been sent to take care of him. They sent back his coffin back in great state, and buried it in the mountain leaves with his parents. So Prince Doran was never seen no more. The country went to deep mourning for him, and then forgot him, and his uncle regained in his stead. The illustrious Parsons accepted his crown with great heroism, and wore it with great dignity to the last. But whether he enjoyed it or not, there is no evidence to show. Damn. All right now. Remember to hit that button, leave a like,
or steal all your money
and all your furniture, and put Taqui's Pussy Lies Planet on your TV on repeat. You see how many videos it is. Look. Alright?
Because we just post this video to make a million skillion likes.
And we out. Peace.
Peace.